Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, April 25th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hey, John.
And Washington commentary columnist and director of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
I hope everybody listening to me who observed had a Zissin couple of Seders and is ready to get back in the game because if you were observing and in fact observing rigorously and therefore we're treating it as a holiday and we're not on social media or watching media or having anything to do with electricity for the most part, like our own Seth Mandel. Seth, when you woke up, let me just put it through. When you concluded the Paschal festivities and the 2 days of holiday and emerged last night to see what was going on in the world, how had the world changed from Monday, from when the Seders began on Monday night?
I felt very much like when Noah first sent out the bird and the bird came back and Noah said, all right, let's go back in the ark for a few more days and then we'll see how the weather is in a few more days. No, I came back online to, as always, to see that things had somehow everything had worked itself out very nicely. And I did, honestly, I went in thinking there's going to be three more schools, by the time I get out of these 2 days, three more schools convulsed by these protests and all the mayhem. And there was only like 1.5. So, but yeah, there are always I used to come back online after 2 days, or if there were a 3-dayer when it was next to Shabbos, I used to always come back online and play this game where I used to say, all right, tell me what happened. And I have to figure out, people would play this game with me. I had to figure out what was true and what was not true before I had a chance to look at the headlines. And this was during, and so during the Trump years, there were things like, I remember coming online once after a holiday or after Shabbos, and somebody said, oh, the president picked a fight with the quarterback, Colin Kaepernick. And I said, oh, I know that's false. That's a ridiculous sentence.
But okay, so where we are, I think, is that not much changed. I mean, except that at least at the University of Texas in Austin, the state officials broke up whatever encampment effort was being made. There were apparently 87 arrests at USC. People are, I guess, campus presence. It's now at Princeton this morning. The encampment started being constructed. Officials are shouting on bullhorns that they're going to give 3 warnings and they're going to go through and wipe the encampments out based on Princeton's own handbook about what you are and are not allowed to do on campus. So people who have, university officials who have not seen the encampments are trying to nip them in the bud, it appears, and do everything they can to make sure that they are not set up now and that everything is now being telegraphed. And so they don't want their campuses to be swamped. The professoriate apparently does want their campuses to be swamped, as they are now playing roles in the encampments. But I guess that yeah, go ahead.
I'll just thinking about what's changed in a sort of meta way. I think what's changed now is that for the time being in the U.S., the story has become the protests, not the war. That has absolutely overtaken any discussion about Israel, about Gaza. It's not about Bibi. It is for us. We're watching. There's supposedly a ground operation that's going to be forthcoming in Rafah. But just like with George Floyd, the story moved right off of the actual incident with George Floyd and became the movement. And the movement is now the story here, not Israel.
What about the counter movement, Matt? Because we had this very interesting event yesterday. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson went to Columbia to say he stood with Jewish students and order and basically yelled at the protesters that they should go back to class, which I think is, I will say, Johnson is a much more interesting and surprising figure than I think we expected him to be. But that just saying go back to class represents a commonsensical American approach to saying, who are you, spoiled little brats wandering around with your drum circles and your charging stations and your Aveeno skin products in the supplies tent on the Columbia campus? Go back to class. You're wasting $90,000 of your parents' money or whatever. So the counter protest is going to start to get very interesting. How Americans are reacting to this, which there's no polling data on and all of that. But the idea that conservatives and Republicans can make hay with what has been going on here, I think is starting to catch on and frightening liberals and leftists who are now talking about how don't blame the students. It's all their outside agitators who are coming, and their outside agitation is preventing students from expressing their free speech rights. Which is, who else used the term outside agitators? George Wallace, Lester Maddox, the Freedom Riders, like they were outside agitators. Everything would have been just fine in Alabama, and
right. The J6 too, by the way. The January 6th, right. It's Antifa in masks or whatever.
Yeah, fake, right? Yeah.
Telling the students to go back to class raises the question of whether the students are enrolled,
right,
at Columbia University or the other schools where these encampments are popping up. It's sometimes hard to tell whether the students are enrolled because A, access to the encampment is restricted, and B, most of the protest / monsters are fully masked, wearing Hamas-like head coverings. So there's no telling who they are. I was struck by Michael Powell's piece in The Atlantic the other day. Michael Powell, the journalist, went into the encampment at Columbia. He found exactly one person who was authorized / willing to talk to him. And he says in the piece, I paraphrase, his other encounters with these people there were frightening and Stalinist. And he's a writer for The Atlantic. He said, I can understand why the Jewish students at Columbia and others in the community are so disturbed and concerned by what's happening. We should also point out that the president of Columbia University has given the protesters another 48 hours. She has extended the deadline for them to remove the camp. It's ongoing negotiations, very similar to the Biden's diplomatic process with the Islamic Republic of Iran. We'll extend the negotiations. Don't cross this line. Oh, so you crossed the line. Well, we'll draw the line here. Another 24 hours for you.
I guess, again, I have to sort of apologize for on Friday suggesting that Manoush Safik, the president of Columbia, had turned a corner and had, in her bringing the NYPD on campus to clear out the encampments and arrest some people that she had put her foot down.
Well, she turned a corner and then turned another corner.
Yes, and then she lifted
right
her
into
foot
the wall.
Up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and kept going. Does anybody know where she is? I think that she just kept walking. After she came out of there, she just kept walking.
Yeah. One of the latest communications came in the early morning hours. I mean, this is heated crisis level negotiations between her and whoever the designated leader of the protesters is.
Yeah. So there is a black comic aspect to all this, right? Which is, as Abe says, so now the protests are about the protests. And though they are chanting anti-Semitic slogans and some people there and doing all that, that this now takes on the form of any reality show. It's now a reality show, and except people are living inside it. It's being done for the TikToks and for the social media and to promote some of these ideas. But I mean, I think the people who are behind it, the people who are the leaders who are negotiating with Manoush Safik, and of course, and honestly, genuinely believe I was the first person to point this out on social media, that the mysterious fact that all the Coleman tents are exactly the same at every campus, suggesting mass purchasing has been done by some central figure. And there are, in fact, rules and regulations that the encampment leaders are promulgating. Who should talk to the media? When are you allowed to talk to the media? When can you go? Where can you go get food? How do you wash up? Where are the bathrooms? All that stuff. That there is a much more highly organized aspect to these things. And the spread, we know in part because Abigail Anthony, who reports for National Review and is herself a graduate of Princeton, got a hold of the encampment construction emails and things at Princeton a couple of days ago before they actually started putting them up. So none of this is spontaneous.
Can I? And that makes sense considering it's a pro-Hamas information operation that's being conducted in the United States. But I also want to make the point: we hear a lot about secessionism, especially coming from the right. The threats of secessionism from the right, breakup. When there was the mini crisis over jurisdiction on the Eagle Pass border crossing in Texas earlier this spring, people were saying, "Oh, this is flashpoint. Could Texas flout federal law? Will they get away with it?" But it does strike me that the secessionists on the left are far more active than on the right. I mean, this type of tactic that we're going to create an autonomous zone where only our preferred law is valid. We saw that in Occupy Wall Street, but we also saw it in the summer of 2020 with the CHOP district in Seattle.
Chop and Chaz,
and Portland, turning essentially into this weird, nightly gunfight between federal officers and these anarchists. The Cop City protest in Georgia, same thing. These protesters kind of come out and they say they form human chains, not allowing anyone in, and they're basically carving out territory where they are the only legal authorities. It's so insane, and it's around us all the time, and it's left wing, not right wing.
The Occupy Wall Street, you may remember that when Occupy Wall Street took over Zuccotti Park at the southern tip of Manhattan, that work had been done beforehand to figure out where this encampment should take place, and that there was a weird aspect of the legal documents surrounding what Zuccotti Park was, that it was partially private and partially public, and that speech, because of its partial public nature or something like that, free speech, First Amendment rights could not be curtailed, so that they had a legal argument that they had standing to put up these tents to live in this encampment. And that I believe when it was finally broken up, that the reason given was essentially sanitary, that
right.
there was a health threat being posed by this, whatever it was, 5-6 months that these people had been spending, living in this park with their free library and their mini government and stuff like that. Here we have the case where we have private property, as we are constantly reminded by Columbia. It's private property, and therefore the police can't come on campus to break up the encampments unless we ask them in, which is, by the way, not true. if you believe
He
that
was
there are
thinking of
felonies.
vampires.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. Yes. Vampires have to stay out unless you invite them in. But I mean, if there are felonies being committed, the police are allowed to enter the premises, and it is the refusal of the owners of the private property to say, you're trespassing, literally get off my lawn. I mean, as Matt, as you laid
Commencement
it
in
out,
2
there's
weeks.
this, get off my lawn, that indicates some Rubicon has been crossed on university campuses that will, by the way, never again, you won't be able to go back.
Well, you never know. Maybe Manoush, when the 48-hour deadline comes, she'll say, okay, I'll call on the cops once again because I can't deal with it. I do want to make one other point, though. I came across an email reported by, I believe, the Free Beacon this morning that the Columbia law students have been telling their fellow Jewish students. So I think it's one group of Columbia law students sending some type of email to Jewish students who would like law enforcement to come and to break up the encampment, that the presence of police officers on Columbia's campus would make these law students feel unsafe. And therefore, the protests must continue indefinitely. This, I think, and we've talked about these issues now on the podcast for years, but this is the scariest part of all of this. It isn't so much the Hamas sympathizers on campus, though that's very scary for the students. I don't want to minimize it. But the longer term threat to America posed by the law students in these various campuses who are going to graduate and going to go into the legal profession and going to staff Democratic administrations for the next generation, to say such idiocy that the presence of police officers would make them feel physically unsafe. Such topsy-turvy logic and unusual, psychobabble is what really makes me stay up late at night.
And this started early on. One of the big things was the Harvard law student having her NYU law student having her invitation to employment, I guess is how they described it, at a major law firm after graduation rescinded. And that got a whole discussion going. And then some of these firms, some law firms, some financial firms had sent letters to colleges saying, listen, this is not a joke. You have to get this under control. You can't send these people to me. We're offering you guys jobs. And part of what was explained to them was that if you go to work at a major law firm, you have lots of different clients, lots of different types of clients, lots of different interested clients. And you bring with you, when you bring this sort of idiocy, Matt, as you called it, it's a threat to, the rest of the firm's work with who knows who they're working with. So they're trying to say to these people, like, just wait till you take literally, please, one step in the real world and look around before you, say all this.
I guess I just want to say I'm distinguishing between in the case of the NYU student who was pro-Hamas, pro-October 7th, and then denied employment. That's not necessarily what these Columbia law students are saying. They're saying we don't want the police officers on the campus because it makes us feel physically unsafe. That's just the more kind of weird, progressive, zeitgeist that, Hamas is the victim. Police officers are the real threat, right? Everything is topsy-turvy. And I think those types of attorneys who aren't like explicitly anti-Semite are actually going to get employed.
Yeah, and also we should say
I
that
want to be like Abe, though. I need to be like Abe, though, and say it's worse than that, because there's an aspect to this where you listen and you say they don't believe this at all. This is a form of real world trolling, that they are once again deploying their feeling unsafe argument, their theoretical lack of safety, with an actual lack of safety that actual people on the campus are experiencing, where this student Jessica Schwalb goes into the encampments and is threatened physically by protesters. Like that actually happened. Sahar Tarhak at Yale, probably inadvertently, but was poked in the eye by a flagpole in the midst of being menaced. It's not clear that the intent was to poke her in the eye with the flagpole. These are things that are actually happening where people are literally unsafe. And just as we spent 10 years dealing with the idea of the microaggression, the aggression that isn't an aggression, so you dub it an aggression by saying that it's like a kind of nascent aggression if it were allowed to bubble into. So when the Columbia law students say this, it's a little like when Mehdi Hassan goes on to Twitter to lecture us about what anti-Semitism is and how we are being anti-Semites because we attack Jewish anti-Zionists. Like, okay, does he really believe that? I doubt it. He's just a Stalinist. These law students are effectively using classic Stalinist reversal semantic infiltration tactics to try to turn your argument against yourself. And where I am unnerved is the fact that the left gets away with this. I just want to give you an example. Casey Johnson, our very valued contributor who writes about, campuses, is himself a professor at Brooklyn College and writes about Title IX and a lot of stuff, said the other day, I mean, this reminds me of Melissa Click. So I was like, oh, Melissa Click. So if you don't remember Melissa Click, there was after Ferguson, after the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, Missouri, there were protests on the campus of the University of Missouri at Columbia, and Melissa Click, who was a professor of communication, essentially tried to call a mob onto a reporter for the Daily Missourian, which is the paper at the University of Missouri, which has a famous journalism school, and said, people come help me out here, to sort of like beat up this reporter or like stop them from going somewhere. And she ended up like pleading guilty to a misdemeanor, and is having to do 30 hours of community service.
We need some muscle over here with some famous words.
Thank you very much. And she was, sentenced to 30 hours of community service, and the University of Missouri fired her for attempting to set a mob on a reporter. She's a professor of communications. So I was like, Melissa Click, what happened to Melissa Click? She's got a job as a professor on a campus at Gonzaga University. Dr. Melissa A. Click's research interests center on popular culture texts and audience, particularly texts and audiences disdained in mainstream culture. I don't really need to read the rest of this. So somehow their bacon is always pulled out of the fire. And with Soros money and whoever that guy, the progressive insurance money, and the people who gave $2 billion to ProPublica and all this, hundreds of these people, if they don't get jobs in administrations, or maybe they'll be cleansed for 5 or 10 years, there'll be setups of NGOs and things like that they will go into. And then 10 years from now, they will emerge as people, even if maybe this makes them a little too hot to get clerkships. Like, what judge would be insane enough to hire somebody who does stuff like this? It just strikes me it would be crazy. Like, you don't know, you issue a decision that your clerk doesn't like, and your clerk does a sit-in in your office. I mean, I'm not
John,
joking.
It's such an interesting point you're making, because they get away with it because we are so bifurcated. There isn't one common culture where you would be in trouble for doing this. You do it, you're in your left sphere, you're fine. That's where you live. You don't live in this larger thing where you have to deal with people on the right, people on the middle. You are in your own complete ecosystem, and you can travel through it.
And that's true on both sides. So not to both sides it, but like the guy who went to shoot up Comet Pizza, right, on Connecticut Avenue, when he was tried, And then he was like, I didn't even know it wasn't true. Like everything that I read, everything that I pay attention to said they were taking these kids and they were, taking the adrenochrome out of their bodies. And I genuinely didn't know that there was a counterfactual here that was actually the truth. And you heard that from some of the J6 defendants who said, I live in this world in which I don't know. I didn't know that they weren't coming for Trump, And so you are able now to silo yourself to such a degree that, yeah, when somebody says, you're not allowed to put up a tent on campus, if you're not one of the organizers who is trying to harness law in these municipalities or things like that to your advantage, because your purpose is to have a pro-Hamas rally, or you're right.
Yeah, I just want to make a
go
point,
ahead.
but you just triggered me with your use of the word tent. What's with the tents? Why is it that in the past decade or so, tents have become so ubiquitous? I cross the bridge to go into DC. I'm greeted with tents. Walk down a park in Washington, D.C., tents. Sometimes on the sidewalk, tents. Now, all throughout America, these tent cities are popping up on the camp. What's with the tents? Why is it now in the front of so many people's minds that they have the right to pull out a stupid tent from REI and just live right in front of me and don't have to care about any of the social consequences? You do.
I actually have an answer.
Please.
It is just like everything else. It is technology. When I was a young kid at camp, it was hell to put up a tent. I mean,
right?
It took an hour. You didn't. It would.
Well, that's why they had the Boy Scout badge. Yeah,
you hiked. You hiked for a full day first. You hiked for a full day first, and then you had like a 5-minute thing of how to build it, and like 2 people slept in a tent that night.
Yeah. Okay. So I have to take my kid on a school camping trip, right? In 2012 or 2013. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I don't know how to. And my friend says, dude, listen, like, you don't know what's gone on in the last like 30, 40 years. You go buy this Coleman tent, it pops up by itself. It takes 2 minutes to put up a tent.
Right.
It's nothing. So the tents themselves, and then once you have it down, folding them up takes 2 minutes also. The only problem with the tents is putting the thing on that makes them a little more waterproof, and then hammering and having a mallet so you can hammer them into the ground so that they don't blow away. It is a technology problem.
Well, whoever invented that technology has a lot to answer for, in my view.
And also, these kids aren't paying $78,000 a year to sit on the ground, Matt.
Yeah,
that's
right.
That's
But this is a side note.
Just imagine Woodstock with tents.
We had the Supreme Court hear the urban camping case while we were on break.
That's right. Yeah.
Just to alert our listeners, there's a chance by the end of June we may have the ability to get rid of these tents, which is really high on my policy priority list. On the Continental policy priority list, getting rid of the tents is like number 2.
If you paid any attention to this case, and it's a town in Oregon, I think it's Oregon, or Washington, that has banned outdoor camping, like has banned sleeping in public spaces at night. And you want to talk about disingenuous argumentation? So the liberals on the court, or particularly Sotomayor and Kagan, said, how can you keep people from sleeping? Everyone has to sleep. So you have to be able to sleep because everyone has to sleep. And the homeless have to sleep. What if you're an unhoused person and you need to sleep? You have to sleep. Who are we to interfere with the biological process of sleep? To which I say, having just spent 2 days at Passover Seder's, dealing with the passages in the Haggadah, the book that is probably the best known Jewish text, I imagine, really, to most people. There's a whole section of the exploration of Talmudic logic, that as you get older and older, it gets more and more and more obscurantist and ridiculous. How many plagues were there? We all know there were 10 plagues, and then there's a discussion in the Haggadah about whether, no, there were 50 plagues. No, there were 250 plagues. And you go, these guys, some of these great Talmudic scholars really should have had a job, because this is thought run amok. So this is like Talmudic logic run. You know perfectly well why you don't let people sleep overnight outside. It's called vagrancy. And it's a human right to sleep. It is not a human right to sleep in public and to create conditions under which people feel the right to take over public spaces and make them their own.
I think Matt's point is such an interesting point, because it's not only just that they're an eyesore and that it's that they're transgressing on everyone's lives, but it says something so interesting about who they are and how many people feel this way. It speaks to a sense of impermanence and drift. And it's also like the rise in squatters everywhere. People just like squatting in other people's home, and there's something like sort of post-apocalyptic about it, or sort of post-civilization.
So I thought you were going.
As somebody else pointed out, they live 200 yards away. Like the unhoused are the unhoused, but the tent cities at Columbia are people who live there. You see that building? You see that window? That's my That's my.
And they don't even
has a
live
refrigerator
there.
in it.
I'm convinced most of them live in Queens.
Queens and Brooklyn,
in Brooklyn, and they come in.
No, but
but Matt, where did you think I was going?
Well, I thought you were going with what it says about the imposition of one's ego on others, which is to me like the mark of our age.
Right.
I feel this way, and screw you if you feel differently, because you have to listen to me. My sovereign self is more important than yours. And our sense of equality and our sense of what freedom means in America today has no response. Oh, okay. If you feel like just sleeping in the sidewalk in front of my house, who am I to say that? Or if all of a sudden you feel like you are of a different biological sex because you woke up feeling that way in the morning, who am I to say that we can't, completely rejigger the rules of our society in your favor? That's where I thought you were going. But your other point was true too.
I mean, there is the thing about the squatting and the tenting and all of that, is that this is yet again a circumstance in which, despite all of our talk about the evils of privilege, or the left's talk about the evils of privilege, people can buy their way out of. Right? The wealthy do not have to worry about people doing this stuff, because they can put up a gate, they can put up a hedgerow, they can live in a doorman building, they can hire, like security guards to escort them from their front door to their cars. They can escape the consequences of this kind of disorder. But poor people and working class people and middle class people can't. And they don't have the resources, moreover, to then hire lawyers or stuff like that to intercede with them, or to go and make an argument with the authorities or something, that something needs to be done because there's a squatter in their house. They can't afford it. They're living paycheck by paycheck. And this is where the limousine liberal argument started to come in and really bite the left, and basically freeze the progress of the left in the late 60s and early 70s, as typified by, of course, Tom Wolfe's deathless essay, Radical Chic, that you can talk this talk, but then you can say no charter schools, but then you send your kid to a private school, and consign every other kid who doesn't have the resources to a horrible public school. And that is something that has been a secret weapon of the anti-left now going on 50 years, and I think it may reemerge.
When I was at the New York Post, we had to. I was the opinion editor. You'd take perspective photos that you had in mind to illustrate a story to the photo editor, because the photo editor of the paper knew what every photo going in the paper was going to be. So you just making sure you're not doubling up. And I remember taking a couple options over to him to illustrate a story about homelessness. And I printed out a picture from the Post, from our backlog, showing a homeless person being roughly removed from near I guess it was Gracie Mansion probably. And I brought it to the photo editor and he said, "Do you know who that is in the photo? You don't recognize them?" And I said, "No, that's a Post reporter." The Post had does this sort of thing to catch the limousine liberalism. And so what they
Right.
had done was they had said to Bill de Blasio, "Hey, how come every time you go on the subway, it looks nicer than when I go on the subway? Let's put," then Bill de Blasio said,
Right.
there's a human right to sleep, like Sotomayor said, outside. So the Post sent a homeless, quote unquote, homeless person to sleep outside de Blasio's place. And it
And see how long, right? And see how long it would, right?
removed and
Right.
tossed out, like one of those sitcom shows where you
right.
see the guy flying through the air.
Can I pick
I
up
wanna-
on your
yeah.
limousine liberal thing, John, just for a
Yeah,
second?
please.
Because our friend David Brooks had a interesting and I think revealing little piece in the New York Times this morning entitled "Why I'm Getting More Pessimistic About Biden's Chances This Fall." And he gives two reasons. And the second reason is he's become more pessimistic because of what's happening to the youth vote. Then David goes on, and I quote, "I think what we're seeing at Columbia and on other elite campuses is a precursor to what we're going to see at the Democratic Convention in Chicago." He talks about 1968, which we, of course, have referenced several times on the podcast. He says, if there are similar clashes in Chicago this August, the chaos will reinforce Trump's core law and order message. It will make Biden look weak and hapless, close quote. But it also will reinforce this idea of limousine liberalism, which is prevalent kind of in the Biden kind of campaign. I mean, if you consider like the difference between Trump visiting the wake of the killed NYPD officer versus Biden's gathering in Midtown Manhattan with Stephen Colbert and all these rich liberals coming, being heckled by the Palestinian activists. There's a general kind of detachment. Biden, we should say, just yesterday was giving remarks where he read out the stage instruction pause, which was a kind of a callback to George H.W. Bush's reading off the teleprompter message, "I care,"
on a card.
On a card, right? Okay.
It was on his card in his pocket. He was in a diner. Right?
Oh,
He went into a diner in New Hampshire.
And I see. So he was reading off the card.
And the card said, basically, your overall message is "I care." So when you go around, you're trying to make it clear to people that you care. And he said, "Message, I care." Yeah.
And there's also the continued, lack of a serious response to what's happening on the southern border. I was telling a friend just last evening, they really need to get these human chain people at the university campuses and send them to the southern border, because then we would be impenetrable. The border crossings would plummet if you just put these pro-Hamas barbarians in charge of border security.
I want to stay on this point a little longer, because it's not just limousine liberalism, but it is also the question of the response to limousine liberalism, because it's not only that they do this and that people annoy. The question is, can it be harnessed, right? So the harnessing of anti-limousine liberalism was a key factor, as I said, in the late 60s, early 70s, of halting the kind of mad onrush of leftist policy in Washington, even though Richard Nixon, when he became president, still kind of drifted in that direction in domestic politics. But there was a kind of, how many bills did Lyndon Johnson pass in 1965? With a 69-seat majority in the Senate, 180 bills were passed that sort of constituted the Great Society. Like, there was going to be no let up in that thing that was happening. And Nixon harnessed it, not really in terms of domestic policy, but really in terms of how liberals talked about the Vietnam War, like most famous, in some ways, the most effective presidential speech in American history, which was the silent majority speech delivered in 1969, largely written by William Safire, where Nixon said, I know there is a silent majority in this country who doesn't believe in all this nonsense. Like, let me hear from you. And the White House got 20 million telegrams at a time when the population of the United States was half what it is now. I mean, this was a very big moment and the real warning sign to Democrats not to go where they were going. And then in 72, of course, Nixon wins 62% of the vote, having won 44% of the vote or something in 1968. It has to be harnessed. You have to direct that feeling. And Trump is not the best way to do that. But I don't know, maybe Mike Johnson, not that the Speaker of the House is going to like have a national profile high enough to sort of make news. But what Mike Johnson did on the Columbia campus is a lodestar for Republicans. It is, I am not with them. I am with you. I am not with the people who are saying that there are, there are more than two genders. I'm with you. You think there are two genders, so do I, and so does God, and so does common sense or whatever.
And also so do these university presidents, right? Because I think the lodestar thing works for Elise Stefanik too, what she's doing in the hearings, which is if you're watching all the reports of the hearings, even if you don't sit and watch on C-SPAN, Manoush Shafiq is sitting there going, no, I don't know why we spell folks with an X.
Yeah.
I guess my students don't know how to spell. Like, make everything that she says was I agree with you, Congresswoman. I agree. That is reprehensible. I agree with you. And I feel like that was also part of the point, was to show people like, look, there's a bunch of people at Columbia. There's a bunch of people on Twitter. It's not how most people think. And the way to prove it is to haul the head of that university in here and ask her, what do you think of your students?
Right. You're absolutely right. So there's a multi-level, So there's a multi-level approach, but it is the harnessing of common sense, which has a very nicely non-ideological quality to it, is the point. We're not the ideologues. We're the normal people. They're all crazy over there. Are these the people you want to have running your country? And they're going to run your country because your president that you're being asked to vote for in 2024 is saying pause, or can't speak a coherent sentence. More to the point about the Radio City thing, by the way, is that today I learned from Twitter that Biden is going to Westchester, to the home of Michael Douglas, the Academy Award-winning actor, now bizarrely playing Benjamin Franklin in an Apple TV series. I liked his last series, Kaminsky Method. But I mean, that's a very bizarre piece of casting. Anyway, Michael Douglas's house, and apparently and I've had this experience actually with the presidential motorcade in Westchester, because security has to close stuff down. School is being canceled for 10,000 kids in Westchester County today, so that the Secret Service can close down an entire neighborhood, so that Biden can go to Michael Douglas's house and raise $5 or $10 million. And next month, there's going to be a big fundraiser in Beverly Hills at Jeffrey Katzenberg's house that will raise another $25 million. And there's Biden being surrounded. Who surrounds him? Right? Liberal celebrities. Does ordinary America like liberal celebrities? I don't think that they dislike liberal celebrities just as a matter of course. But I mean, he's living in this world of unreality that is always the problem for presidents, is that they, don't know what's going on in the world because they live in this bubble protected by the Secret Service. They only talk to the people who work for them, all of that. But I mean, this is a very extreme thing. Like, Biden doesn't know that people don't think.
Yeah, I mean, they might like the president hanging out with liberal celebrities when the president is Obama and something of a celebrity himself, and also when prices haven't gone up by about 19% over the course of his first term. And when the border crisis hadn't yet emerged in his first term. So sure, hang out with the celebrities. That's what every Democrat does. The Hollywood celebrities part of the Democratic base. But it is slightly dangerous when you have all of these other aspects of your presidency that have gone totally sour. And when you have this mass movement that's hostile to civilization, that's active on America's campuses. And your response was at best ambivalent when asked about it the other day.
Well, let's talk about that because, again, I think Biden keeps snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. He scored an enormous victory this week. They held for a weird parallel to the Inflation Reduction Act. Like some presidencies or some political organizations would have given up on some of the aspects of these foreign aid packages at some point because it's like, I'm not going to waste my time. We're not getting it through. We'll say that the Republicans stank. I'm too bored. We have to do other stuff. But they kept at the Inflation Reduction Act or the green energy, whatever we want to call it, and somehow beat Joe Manchin down and got the bill through. And this is not like the Joe Manchin thing. They and Mike Johnson and Mitch McConnell liberated Republicans to vote for the aid that they wanted to vote for anyway, even though I know a slight majority of Republicans in the House voted against the aid packages, but but it was enough, like 360 congressmen, House members, and, was it 79 senators or something like that voting for the aid package? But he's not taking victory laps. I mean, they're doing it. They're sending the aid to Ukraine yesterday. They're sending ATACMS and all sorts of other stuff. And they got this $26 billion for Israel, which I should mention that isn't just for Israel. There's this ridiculous bribery money for the Palestinians to reward them for starting a war against Israel on October 7th. Nonetheless, whatever they get. And he is not able to take a victory lap because he's too afraid of these, commie terrorist lovers in his own faction that he's worried are going to come down around his head.
Right. The narrative around the aid is that Ukraine is our ally and in a war that not of their choosing, and Israel is our ally in a war not of their choosing, and we have our allies back. It's a very, very simple narrative. Yeah. But you can't say that without angering people. You can't say that about Israel without angering people on the left, and you can't say that on the right without Marjorie Taylor Greene, putting in a challenge to your speakership or whatever. There is this sort of it's funny the way it shook out this way, but the underlying point is he's afraid to say we're helping our allies against the enemy because he can't say Hamas is the enemy and Qatar is the enemy and Iran is the enemy because we're giving Iran money too.
I understand why he can't say Qatar is the enemy. Our relations with Qatar are very complicated. We have asked Qatar to do things for, there's a lot of back channeling that Qatar, so you can't just turn on Qatar. They might release all kinds of documents and behind the scenes negotiating things to let the world know that you were relying on them. But not being able to say that Hamas is our enemy, like this is madness that has gripped them, and they are, like I say, he's snatching kind of like haplessness from the jaws of victory. He won this huge victory this week, and he's not taking any victory laps. Am I taking crazy pills? Like I really don't understand.
Well, if you take a victory lap, you have to do. If you make the argument, and John, you've said this from the beginning, if you make the argument for the conflicts, for helping our allies win these conflicts, you have to do what it takes to win the conflict. It obligates you to treat them with seriousness that you say. And he's not going to do that with Ukraine either. We've sort of passed the point where he's willing to do what he's going to do for Ukraine. And Ukraine is the safe one with Democrats.
Yeah,
he doesn't want to write.
He's been around so long. He doesn't think foreign policy is what motivates voters. much more interested in domestic policy. That's why you have this rash of new regulations, EPA announcing again this morning before we record this that the coal business has to end, put itself out of business.
Right.
You have stringent environmental regulations. They're going after the other part is they're going after the fees that airlines put on your tickets. That's what he's interested in talking about. He's not interested in doing, he's interested in helping Israel and Ukraine. He signed the bill into law. He did get it through. That is a success, but he doesn't want to talk about it. And that's one reason why he's kind of twisted himself into pretzels with vis-a-vis Israel, but also one reason why Ukraine has not done as well on the battlefield over the past year as it might have done otherwise.
And but also one of the things about when I said that the story has become the protests and not the war, is that this has turned Israel it's turned it from being a foreign policy issue into a domestic issue. The issue is now rule of law, campuses, education, freedom of speech. We're in a whole new realm now in terms of what this is about.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Donald Trump's week, because it's pretty interesting, and we've noted over the last 3 weeks that there is reason to believe that the Democratic strategy of trying to tag Trump with as many, charges as possible in courtroom, we've said, oh, this is going to make him stronger. It's not making him stronger. It may be, at least nationally, it's not making him stronger. As the Trump trials and the Trump issues have moved to center stage, and a lot of the media coverage over the last 3 weeks as the fraud trial has, or the check kiting scandal, whatever you want to call it, has moved to center stage. Biden's numbers have gone up. Trump's numbers have gone down. There's a fascinating, I think it's a Pew poll that has enormous numbers of people saying that Biden does not have the physical stamina necessary to be president or whatever. It's like 66% of people say that. But 59% of people say Trump does not have the honesty required to be president. Now, that's so obviously, if you're going to use negative numbers, then Biden is doing worse than Trump. But that's not a good number it's not good for people to be reminded that Trump is dishonest. And you can think that he's dishonest without thinking that he's a felon. And you can make you uncomfortable to vote for him. And then we have these weird data points like the Pennsylvania primary. Nikki Haley quit the race 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks. I don't even know how long ago. And she got 150,000 votes in the Pennsylvania primary, most of them mail votes. Now that's, you can say when the presidential race comes around, there's going to be a lot more Republican voters, and Trump's numbers are going to go way up because 60% more people will vote in November as voted in this primary. But 150,000 people who vote no against him is not good. It's bad, and it's bad in a state that, he lost by 80,000 votes. Like, maybe those people will come back to him. I don't know if they will, though, because it's a very symbolic thing to vote for Nikki Haley in this primary after she quit the race. Like, I mean, maybe it's so easy to do a mail-in ballot that it doesn't mean that by November you won't change your mind and say you have to vote for Biden. And today the argument that Trump should be immune from prosecution at the federal level is going to be heard at the Supreme Court. So that will raise some of that again also. So we do have a race to the bottom here between Trump and Biden. Like the lack of enthusiasm on each party's part we have 20% of Republicans who seem not really to want to vote for Trump. They're active Republicans, so they're not the entire party, and we don't know if the number will be that high, but it's a lot of people. And we hear about Biden's lack of enthusiasm, but we're really not talking much about the lack of enthusiasm for Trump, which is a real thing.
Yeah, you're right to say that Biden's been improving. What's interesting to me is some of these numbers is that Biden is running ahead of his job approval rating. So Biden's job approval rating is still pretty dismal. Yet in the head-to-heads against Trump, the race is essentially tied, or it's Biden has a narrow lead. Another thing to say about it is these are national numbers, and the race in the states is much more favorable to Trump, continues to be. Now, of course, state polling is, hit or miss and such, but just going off on what we know, even during Biden's recent rise in the polls, places like Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the states that will decide the election, Trump still has an advantage. So that's worth noting as well. There's also this idea, which I'm just, my reading of the New York Times today is providing so much material. But Stu Stevens, the Republican kind of, I guess, former Republican operative.
Well, he ran Mitt Romney's
campaign, been around forever, but a fierce critic of Trump, and someone whose criticism of Trump, led to his reevaluation of the purposes of the GOP and center-right politics more generally. He's in the Times today saying every day in court improves Trump's chances in November, and kind of echoing points that I think I've made on the podcast, which is the change in circumstances from the mega rallies of 2016 and 2020 to now the constrained room of the courthouse and these kind of mini events which show Trump in a more personal, almost human dimension, may actually help turn out the Trump base and win him in November. So I think what the bottom line should be when we confront this data is confusion and despair.
But I mean, despair, of course, always a good approach.
You're right.
As you know, but I do think it's really interesting. We keep saying this, like this is an unprecedented race. You have an 82-year-old man versus, an 80-year-old man versus a whatever, and Trump is 78 and he's got 91 indictments, and Biden seems senile and all of that. But I think the most interesting aspect of it is the complete lack of, with the exception of like the MAGA base, the complete lack of enthusiasm for the candidates who are running in the race. And that's why RFK Jr. is standing there as some kind of stand-in, not just for like lunacy and, conspiracy theories and anti-vaxxing and all of that, but just like, I'm not them. So he's the them person.
And now there's some evidence in the more recent polls that he's starting to hurt Trump a little bit more than Biden in the polling. It's unclear who he's actually going to hurt the most, but it's just a very unusual presidential campaign. I think that's the bottom line. And you have the national numbers that we got just the other day showing the race tied, but you also had this recent poll from Bloomberg Morning Consult on the same day, showing Trump's lead in the states is pretty durable.
So if we have this jump ball race, despite the electoral college numbers now turning, pretty favorably in Trump's, like he's at 290 or something like that, if the election were held today. So that would be a comfortable, not big win, right? George W. Bush won in 2004 with 286 electoral votes or something like that. That's the first one with 271 or whatever it was in 2000 once the Supreme Court had ruled. So we've had some very narrow wins here, but I just think it's fascinating to note that we are talking about lack of enthusiasm, which means what's going to matter is who's better at naked raw politics. And right now, though Trump is running a very good race, there's reason to believe that the Democrats are better at what they'll do nationally than Republicans. We have a complete overhaul of the RNC to turn it into a fundraising arm for the Trump legal bills and not for get out the vote efforts. And the Democrats don't have that problem, and they are good. They are good at getting voters out.
Right, and also I think the lack of enthusiasm is also a reminder that the Democrats have two options in front of them, and one of them doesn't work. The lack of enthusiasm for the election shows that people aren't interested in the narrative that if you don't vote the right way, this will be the last election of your lifetime and this is the end of democracy and all that stuff. Whatever people feel about that, I'm not saying the people who are saying that don't believe what they're saying. What I'm saying is voters don't seem to believe what they're saying, but they will take arguments on all sorts of other stuff on the issues. So the apocalypse now argument simply isn't working. Otherwise, we would not be having extended conversations about a lack of enthusiasm, how nobody really feels like voting because nobody
By
thinks
the
the
way,
country is on the line. And if they just adjust along those lines, I think their ceiling is higher than it is now.
Right. Well, it's important. I got a note now because we're as it happens as we are recording this, the GDP numbers have come in and they're terrible. The first quarter of 2024, and they are terrible. It's 1.6% growth. The expectation of the the world of economists somehow that creates an expectation was for 2.5%. So this is coming in, I don't know, like 50% lower than economists expected. So we have the argument that has been promulgated over the last couple of months by very, very passionate Democratic partisans that, the economy is good and we just need to convince people that the economy is great. Look at these numbers. They're great. They're fantastic. There, by the way, are some fantastic numbers. America is now producing 27% is now 27% of the world's either economy or its production or something like that, which is the highest number in 40 years. There are good numbers, but the economy is growing very, very slowly all of a sudden. Maybe it grew too fast at the end of 2023. So the slowdown is people taking, but this now raises all kinds of questions. Like, when you have a bad number in the first quarter of an election year, that does not go well for you. That was the George H.W. Bush story in 1992, and the Clinton story and the Reagan story in 1990 and the first quarter of 1980. And Clinton had this big number in 1996 which was the kind of predictor of his runaway victory against Bob Dole in November. So Biden's got another hampering because we've got inflation, we've got slow growth. The only good part of this could be that if the economy is slowing down, the Fed will come under pressure to lower interest rates. But of course, then inflation will get worse. And I don't know. It's not good. Not a good number, Bob. Not good. So that's where I guess that's where we'll leave it. I want to make a commentary recommends and following Matt's. I don't know when as we keep going, we get to this point now that we're recommending a tweet, but I did want to recommend a tweet. I'm sorry, because
did I recommend a tweet?
Yeah, didn't you recommend a tweet? Somebody recommended. Hey, I'm now going to recommend.
I think you did. You're the
you recommended. You recommended the children,
time.
the banana children, the banana toddlers,
okay,
the Savannah bananas. Yeah.
Right, but that was a video. This is just a tweet. Okay?
Literally a tweet. Okay.
From an unlikely source of fascinating, clever Monica Lewinsky.
Oh, yes.
Monica Lewinsky last night,
she's witty,
on Twitter, posted a picture of the White House. I don't know what triggered this, because it came out sometime I think like at 9:30 at night last night. Picture of the White House, and she says, "You wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where they raised me."
What's going on there?
I don't know, but that is one hell of a tweet. I don't know what's, it's like if she had only had this.
Monica also has a Columbia University connection.
Does she?
She studied there after the scandal, and in fact, she was on campus on 9/11. My friends and I encountered her during that time. So She's somehow tied up, and maybe that's what tweet is in reference to.
I just want to say it's a Taylor Swift reference.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, it is?
It's a Taylor Swift
reference. Okay.
There's a lyric, and and it became. I was all.
Thank God you're here, Seth.
This is how popular this meme was. I was offline for 2 days and I came back online and I saw the Lewinsky thing and everybody saying how hilarious it was. And I was off for 2 days. I didn't know what this was. So this was a Taylor Swift lyric. And so people were substituting their own lines. You wouldn't in the asylum where I was raised, and people would show a picture of their whatever they would joke about it, their house.
Okay, so she showed the White House. So that's that. Okay, yeah. So
she won the meme
backstory, right?
Yeah.
Of course, the person who was raised in an asylum in popular culture was Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street, the bastard son of 10,000 maniacs. You may recall,
man,
Freddy Krueger. Anyway, so
you wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where Freddy Krueger was raised.
Well, there you go. That's what I'm saying. So anyway, I'm glad to get this lesson as our resident Swiftie. Thank you, Seth. You do have a 10-year-old daughter, so that does put you squarely in Taylor territory right now. Anyway, we will be back tomorrow. So for Seth, Abe, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.